Hi, welcome back to Bookish Brummy. My name's Mel and today is my weekly review video where I review all the books that I've read in the last week and try not to give you any spoilers in this video. Before we jump into the reviews, I just want to point out my really cool t-shirt that I received for Christmas off my partner, Bookish Brummy. So I thought that was really nice and really sweet as well because the lettering is, they tried to copy the Ultimate Storyteller collection lettering off the Stephen King books, because obviously I'm a massive Stephen King fan, so I thought it was very cool. Okay, so at the moment for the books that we're reviewing, I'm in the middle of Big Book January. So at the beginning of January I put forward 8 books that I was planning on reading or going to attempt to read through January, and all these books are over 500 pages long. So I'm just going to put those up on the screen now. However, King Sorrow has now been discounted from the list because that's going to feature in a book challenge that I'm going to do in February, so I needed it for that, so I decided to take it out. However, because these books are all so big, there's no chance I'm going to run out of books to read before the end of January, so I didn't even substitute another one in its place. So at the moment we're doing quite well. We've read The Vampire Lestat, we've read the Poisonwood Bible, which I thought was absolutely fantastic. I've read The Passage, which I'm going to review for you today, and then I've also started another one which we'll sort of have a small talk about, but I'm not going to review because I haven't finished reading it yet. So when I left you last week, I'd got about 35% of the way through this. So this is The Passage, which was written by Justin Cronin and published in 2010. This was the biggest book on the list for Big Book January, so this is sitting at 963 pages long. It is the first book in a trilogy, so I'll just put the trilogy up on the screen now so you can see what the other books are. Now all of these books are chonkers, they're all over 700 pages long, although this one is the longest out of the 3. And I bought the first 2 at book 66 last year in about October time, I'd say, and I was thinking that the story looked really good. However, you know, you're sort of thinking to yourself, how can the story have so much to say that it's literally a trilogy of 3 huge massive books? And I was sort of wondering that while I was reading this as well, if I'm honest, but then I've got to the end and I can sort of see now the amount of world building going on in here, where this story could actually go for another 2 books, potentially even more than that if you wanted to carry on with it. So I'll try and, I can't go into too much detail with this book because I don't want to spoil it for you, but essentially we have quite a few main characters in this book, and we flick between the past, the present, and then we're in the future, which is then classed as the present, to set the scene. So we start off in the past with some like botched mission in the jungle, where essentially this scientist was trying to find this virus or something that he believed could extend human life. Anyway, this went severely wrong. The army had got involved with it as well, and really only a few people came out of that alive. And anyway, this now feeds into a government project called Government Noah. So essentially they have taken 12 death row victims and told the death row victims that they can commute their sentence to just life in prison if they sign some paperwork. And they're very shady about not telling these prisoners what it is exactly that they will be doing, which means that they no longer have to receive the death sentence and that they will now just spend their life in prison. But essentially what they are doing is they are using them as test subjects for this Project Noah. So this essentially ends up with the facility where Project Noah is, you know, being constructed, tested, all these things. There's an escape from that facility essentially, and that virus is now let out into the world. And those death row inmates wouldn't be really classed as fully alive. They are now sort of the walking undead. So they're sort of vampires, I suppose that you would call them, but they're not vampires in the way that like Lestat that we read at the beginning of the month. They're not classy and going to the opera. these ones are more like, I remember there was a film years and years and years ago called, I think it was called 40 Days of Night, and the vampires in that were really like savage and literally just jump down from buildings and like rip people apart. And that's sort of what these are, and they get out into the world. So then the timeline moves forward, and then we spend quite a bit of the book in the forward timeline where we're in a settlement of people who are the children of survivors, well, the grandchildren and the children of survivors who had managed to live through the exposure of this virus being exposed into the world. And they have basically had to barricade themselves into this settlement with really high-tech security. I say high-tech, it's not exactly tech because they don't have the tech, but it's more like high security, let's say. So there's always got to be several people on watch, and they've always got to be armed. But what is interesting about this settlement, even though obviously in the modern day that we have a lot of technology, and the reason that Project Noah was even happening in the first place is because, you know, we have really modern, up-to-date technology that can allow us to do these kind of scientific experiments. Once, like, you know, you've got a sort of apocalyptic scenario going on, even the basic things like electricity suddenly become very, very precious. And, you know, 100 years after that virus had escaped, you know, how people are actually still managing to charge batteries and things like that is questionable, and actually the quality of their life has the potential to go down rather than up, because they can't, they just don't have access to the modern technology that we have today, because they don't have the power resources or the people resources really, because obviously they're living in a small settlement. So, you know, you've got like one nurse, and you've got like one or two electricians, like mechanics and things like that. So that's really, really interesting. So essentially the rest of the book then sort of takes place in this settlement really, and the people in the settlement you know, they don't know all of this stuff that's happened before. They just know that there are these things called virals, which are basically outside their gates, and these virals are essentially the undead that are out there. So, you know, the book is really interesting because we've got multiple main characters going on as well. So we've got a couple of main characters from the settlement, so we're sort of seeing the story through their point of view. So we've got like Peter, and we've got Michael, who most of the narration comes through them. We've also obviously got government officials in the beginning of the book, although obviously they're not so much at the end of the book when we're talking in the settlement, because they're obviously not in that settlement. And then we've got a little girl called Amy, who starts out at the beginning of the book, and then she comes into the book sort of later on, and she's like the answer, essentially. Like, they're all, you know, told that she's the answer to this virus, but nobody really knows how or why, or what the government have done to her to make her that. So I suppose like what this first book is doing is it's building out all the world and all the characters that you need, and it's obviously bringing some intelligence to our characters about what the scenario actually is, other than the fact that they have these sort of savage animals outside their gate, like trying to attack them. So yeah, I can't really go into it more without actually exposing like the main sort of plot reveals. And I have to admit, like, I really enjoyed this. I'd read some reviews on it, and some people said that they got a little bit bored in the middle of the book, which I didn't actually. But when I was in the middle of the book, I was thinking, okay, like, I'm not sure how we could spread this out to another 2 books, especially 2 books that seem to be equally as big as this one. But then it sort of picks up again, I would say, probably 600 or 700 pages, and there's a couple of things that some of the characters sort of say, or information that they sort of come across, and you think, oh, you know. So and a lot of those things don't get answered by the end of this book, so they're sort of like lingering questions that are there. So I am really motivated to read the second book, which is called The 12, and that book continues this story. And also the way that this story ends in this book, you know, in your imagination you can easily see several different scenarios as to how, you know, this is unraveling essentially, because everything is not solved obviously by the end of this book. But I feel what Justin Cronin has done, he's built a really complex post-apocalyptic world, and in this book he's obviously had to give us a lot of the backstory, and a lot of characters in that backstory, so that essentially that now that we're sort of in the future, which would be classed as the present, I guess, our characters will know what information it is that our characters might need to get hold of, because otherwise I don't think that it would make much sense if we didn't know it as the reader and we were just in the settlement. Because to be honest, if you're just in the settlement and you didn't know there's all this backstory, I'm not sure that I'd be interested to keep reading, to be honest, because, you know, after a couple of 100 pages where, you know, they have various sightings of these creatures outside of their gates, and, you know, they're obviously trying to fire weapons at them, you know, after a couple of 100 pages of that, it would be really easy to get bored if you didn't know that there was something more significant that these characters sort of needed to realise and really needed to understand and get their teeth into. So I actually thought it was done really well. I can understand why some people may have got a bit bored in these few 100 pages where we're sort of in the settlement and they're just going about their everyday life. But I actually kind of liked that. I didn't mind sitting there for a couple of 100 pages with those characters and understanding them, and, you know, understanding the settlement and the way that it worked. So it's not all, I don't say this book is like action, like as a page turner, but I think like in the first 200 or 300 pages there's definitely a page turner and there's a lot of action going on, and then you have a bit of a lull because you spend some time with the characters being more or less quiet, and then the action picks up again at the end of the book, I'd say in the last 200 to 250 pages, which, you know, will sort of take us to setting the scene for the next book. So as I say, I really enjoyed this book. I wouldn't rate it a 5. I think I would rate it a 4. And the reason for that is essentially, you know, it wasn't a page turner, and as I said, there was some quiet time in the book, and I didn't mind that. But this book didn't get me in the same way the Poisonwood Bible did the other week, where I literally could not put it down. But I also think there's quite a lot to take in this book. There's a lot of characters, there's a lot of different time frames and things to remember. So I actually kind of felt like I'd read a bit and I'd have to go and take a break, and then read a bit and have to go and take a break. So that doesn't make it a bad book, but I don't think it's a 5-star book. But I'm still really interested in carrying on with this trilogy, and I'm really glad that I did pick it up. I didn't realise at first that it was a sort of vampire story. I didn't realise that from reading the back of the book, but then, yeah, when you start reading more synopses of it, then you realise that it is. So yeah, I had not picked this one out blind to read. I had chosen to read this one off the list, with it being the biggest one. I thought if I'm going to do Big Book January, then I really wanted to actually get through the biggest book on the list, and as I said, it's been sat on my shelf for a couple of months and I really did want to make a start on it, so I'm really glad that I have. So last week, when I was still 35% into that one, and because it's so long, I did figure that it would take me most of this week to read, but I had drawn randomly the name of the next book that I was going to read out of the little ramekin, and that book was going to be T.C. Boyle, The Terranauts. So this is actually one of the smallest books, which is it's just over 500 pages, so it's one of the smallest books that was on the list. However, I have not actually started reading this, even though I did finish The Passage on Sunday, because this book also follows a settlement of people, and whilst it's not post-apocalyptic, they're sort of living under a biodome doing an experiment, again for the government, like being watched. I thought that I couldn't just go into this one directly after The Passage, because the premise is far too similar of having a settlement of people on a government project, even if it's different. So I needed to get a little bit of space away from The Passage and that settlement and the people in there, and the government officials that we meet in there before starting this one. So I have started reading another book instead, but when I finish that book, then I will start this book, and I've definitely got time to do that in this next week. So the book that I chose to start reading instead, just to sort of clean my brain a bit between The Passage and The Terranauts, is The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. I don't know if you can see where my bookmark is there, but essentially this was published in the year 2000 and actually did win the Booker Prize as well in the year 2000, which is really good because Margaret Atwood had actually been nominated several times for the Booker Prize, and this is the first time that she'd ever actually won it. So this one is 637 pages long, and I've read 438 pages so far, so that puts me at 69% through the book. So I definitely feel that by the end of tomorrow night I will have finished this book, and then I'll begin reading The Terranauts. So this is completely different from The Passage, which I kind of wanted it to be, so that's really, really good. And as I said, I can't really review it at the moment. I can't say too much because I haven't finished the story, but I am really, really enjoying it. And what I will say is in October, I think it was October, or maybe November actually, in November I read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, and I enjoyed that story because I do like dystopian stories, but I did feel like I didn't enjoy totally the way that it was written. It felt a bit clunky, whereas I'm enjoying this far more. I think the way this is written, like the prose in this is absolutely beautiful. I'm really enjoying what she's doing in here, but we're sort of following a split timeline in here as well. So we've got events that have happened in the past, and then we've got, you know, our modern day character, our present day character, sorry, who is called Iris Griffin, who used to be called Iris Chase, but then she got married and is now called Iris Griffin. And she's in her early 80s, and she's basically remembering back to her childhood, which started just after World War One, or maybe just before World War One, and then essentially goes on into World War Two, which is where most of the remembrance is happening, about her and her sister Laura. And then just after World War Two, her sister Laura drives her car off a bridge, and so she's remembering her sister, and she's remembering her life, and she's also trying to remember like the circumstances of her sister's death. And what's interesting is you know, back at the time when her sister did this, and she was such a religious person as well, nobody would actually come out and say that her sister had ended her own life, even though it seems quite obvious that's what's happened. And I think that our main character accepts that, but she's sort of talking about the fact how other people like skirting around this and not really, you know, saying that's what had happened. People just wanted to gloss over that fact. But interestingly, the way that we're sort of talking about the past and what was happening during World War II, whilst our character is remembering, there are also parts of the book where she's published posthumously a book that her sister had supposedly written before she died, and that book is kind of seems to be a bit autobiographical to what her sister may have been doing during these years in World War II, and an affair that she's having. Well, it seems to be an affair. It may or may not be, but essentially she's meeting a man that it seems like the character in this story is not meant to be meeting, because she's always sort of trying to do it undercover. And so this secondary story that's being told is, I think, really important to actually what essentially happens to Laura, and her driving her car over the bridge. So that's, you know, revealing itself bit by bit through the book. And then to make it a little bit more complicated, within the story of like Laura's story, which is sort of talking about this love affair between these two people, the conversations going on between these two people, they're also kind of writing stories together. So you've got a story within a story within a story. So it's really interesting in that respect, but I'm also finding it quite easy to read. So now I've said all that, I think that that makes that sound like a really, really complicated book, and how you probably might need to take a break every 10 minutes like trying to read this. But actually it's flowing really, really quickly, and I'm really enjoying it, and I'm really enjoying the way that it's written. I really enjoy the main character, Iris, at the moment. I think, you know, the way she perceives the world is really interesting. So yeah, I can't review this fully. I will review this on our next weekly catch up, when I should have finished it, and hopefully would have finished the Terranauts as well. But this is a really, really, really nice surprise, and I'm really glad that it's not written in that clunky way The Handmaid's Tale was written. I can definitely see already, even though I'm only 69% in, why this was an award winner. I think it's a really beautiful look at different stages of life. So after that, obviously I'm going to read the Terranauts, and I've got, I think I've got about 9 or 10 days before the end of the month. So I don't know if I will get the opportunity to read any of the 2 books that are left, which is Insomnia by Stephen King or A Little Life by Hanya Yanagihara. Now I can almost certainly say I'm not going to have time to read the Stephen King one, because that was the second biggest book at 900 pages, but may possibly be able to fit in the Hanya Yanagihara one, A Little Life. It really just depends on how busy I am and how much reading I get done. So I definitely like to think I can finish off the Terranauts and the Blind Assassin. I'm not sure about the other 2, but even if I don't get to the other 2, actually I'm really happy with the big books that I've managed to get through this month, because all of those books have been on my shelf for a little bit of time. And you know, I've been sitting there wanting to read them and not had the opportunity because I didn't have the right reading prompts come up. So I'm going to say that our next weekly catch up, which will be the last one to review books, should be on a Thursday, but there's no point in us having it on the Thursday because the end of the month is on the Saturday. Now, so I'm going to put the weekly catch up on the Saturday, so not this Saturday coming, but the Saturday afterwards. We will then do the weekly catch up on the books I've read, and we'll also do the end of month review on that Saturday. And then obviously February will start on the Sunday, so we can begin to read for our new challenge. However, I'm also going to post a video, I think I'm going to post it on the Friday, so obviously not tomorrow, but next Friday we'll post a video which will reveal what the reading prompts are going to be in February. So there is going to be some Stephen King in there, so hopefully that will make the Stephen King readers happy. Because yeah, I've not managed to read as much Stephen King this month as I'd have liked to, but that's fine because I've been getting involved in other books. So because we're going to have a video on the Friday and the Saturday next week, I'm not going to film a video on the Monday, because I'm not really sure there's much point, and I don't think that I have any books at the moment that I particularly want to do a really deep, in-depth review of. I did post a video Monday just gone where I had a look, I had an audit of the current series of books that I'm reading, and just how many series I'm actually reading, and which ones I want to continue with and which ones I've decided that I'm just not going to finish. So if you're interested in that, yeah, I posted that video on Monday. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below if you've read The Blind Assassin or if you've read The Passage by Justin Cronin, and what your thoughts are on those books. I'd be really interested to hear about that. So yeah, if you've enjoyed the video, please press the like button, and if you'd like to see any of my future content, please press the subscribe button so those videos become visible to you in your feed. And I will see you next Friday for the reveal of what the reading prompts are going to be next week. Thanks for watching. Bye!